Hi everyone, I've just started. I was halfway through this call in my closed Facebook group and realised I can't share it to my public page, so I'm doing this round 2. So I hope the internet holds out for me. Welcome everybody to the call, and I'm sorry I'm a little bit late, that's why. And I just wanted to ask before we get started, which do you think out of this 4 bunches of kale and this thin slice of beef liver, which do you think you'd be able to get your child to eat in the space of a day? I think you know where I'm headed with this, so I'm going to leave that aside for a second and come back to that in a minute. But today we're going to be exploring why nose to tail eating is so important for children, especially this generation of children and adults as well, because we're seeing disease in both groups. And I really think it's important to share this information with other parents, particularly those who are striving to feed their children a very nutrient-dense diet, as most of us are. But I actually, even 5 years ago, wasn't really aware until I started running the numbers myself. I had no idea of this information. So I think there's many people out there on the health front who are a little bit misguided and just not aware of these facts. So please share with other parents who are concerned about their children's health. Before we get started, I really wanted to quickly mention that my What to Eat program, which only runs once per year, is starting in 2.5 weeks' time. And we've made a bit of a decision in our household to not run it next year because we're going to take a year off for baby making purposes. So this would be the last program until the year 2020. It sounds so in the future, but it's only 2 years away. It's a bit bizarre, isn't it? So yeah, if you don't know who I am a nutritionist, I'm a whole food chef, and the program, it's called What to Eat, is basically, it's a distillation of my 15 years of study in the field, ongoing, and I guess it's all the mind-blowing bits on my journey, the bits that made me go, oh wow, like this, exactly, organ meats. I had no idea. The things that I learned in nutrition school, but the highlights are the bits that I actually learned after nutrition school, the bits that they didn't teach me in nutrition school. So it's really for those, I actually think it's better for people who have been on their whole foods journey for a little while. Anyone who's tried a few different ways of eating already, you might be trying to heal illnesses in your family and using food to help you do that. Anyone who's just obsessed with health and nutrition and doesn't have time to go and do a degree, it's for those people. And what it offers is a really deep, lifelong understanding of how to not only source food, and not just in terms of reading the labels, that's important, in terms of, organic, grass-fed, all that sort of stuff, but really to be able to navigate without those labels, how to find the best quality food, because that's a huge one. That is not stressed enough, how your food is grown and raised. So that's a big part of the program, but also how to prepare and cook and store it in a way that enhances its medicinal value. Because I think a lot of us on this journey believe in the power of food as medicine, but we just don't know what to do. We don't know how to make it the most nutrient dense for us and how to make all the nutrients really bioavailable for us. So that's what the program focuses on, but lots more. There's lots of really great tangents as well because, yeah, it's mine. So there's lots of Facebook Lives coming up over the next 2 weeks. We've got interviews on Wednesday, and I'm going to run a couple more of this format where I'm talking to camera next week on Saturdays, I should mention. So the next 2 Saturdays. Next week is all about how to make your own flavorless gelatin to use in place of the powdered stuff. And the powdered stuff's great for travel, for convenience, but there's a lot of benefits to making your own. And I'm going to show you how to do that, or talk you through how to do that at least, and explain why you'd want to bother making it yourself. The next one, 2 Saturdays from now, is going to be good. And I really think you should watch that if you're interested in, where your food comes from and how to be able to discern the difference between quality meats. That's one for you. So that one, I'll take 3 different chickens, 1 conventional, 1 pastured organic, which is supposedly, the epitome of, awesome. If you're looking at the labels, and 1 non-organic, but regeneratively farmed. And the difference is going to be very visual, just like this, and will be quite thought-provoking. It will show you how to determine the health of the animal without looking at a label. I can guarantee you that. So before we start, I would love you to answer me this question. I would love you to tell me, is the reason, assuming you know that organ meats are good to include in the first place, you may not, but is the reason that you haven't included them to date, or you're, holding off from including them on a regular basis? Is it because you're squeamish? Or is it because you just don't know where to start in terms of sourcing and preparing them and how to cook them? Or both? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to know where you are at on your journey, because that really helps me. So if it's both, that's fine, but I'd love to know if there's one versus the other, which one trips you up the most. So I want to get started, but I'm going to get into all the practical tips and, the recipe ideas and things like that. But I really want to talk about children, and talk about why I think it's so critical that all children, unless you're choosing to do the vegetarian vegan thing, which is fine, why it's so important that all omnivorous children include these foods. And I think really it starts with the fact that most children today are born, and I'm sure you've heard that fact quoted, I don't know how many toxins, but it's a couple of 100 toxins in their bloodstream at birth. So they come into the world already contaminated. It's a horrible idea, and I don't want to focus too much on the negative side, but our world today, we have the lingering pesticides from previous generations. So in mothers, we still see DDT in mothers when the blood samples are taken. And we have all these new toxins that have never been, we've never seen before. So whether it's pesticides or plastics or heavy metals in the environment, or even our endogenous toxins. So our gut, if we have a dysbiosis happening in the gut, or an overgrowth of fungus in the gut, then some of those microbes are actually secreting toxins that are far worse than anything we could create in the environment. And that's pretty scary. But we don't need to focus so much on how scary it is, because there's so many solutions. And really what lies at the heart of it is more nutrients into the system. And the reason for that is that when the way that we remove toxins is really not just to excrete them, which is one way, we can just excrete them through the skin, but before we get to the excretion process, we need to neutralize them. So what the body does is, in the liver, we actually use all our antioxidant nutrients. There's a huge store of antioxidants in the liver. So vitamin A, coenzyme Q10, selenium and zinc, and all of these wonderful nutrients that the body uses to neutralize the toxins. And then we put them out to excrete them. And so you can see that if you, let's say you're smoking or you're drinking really heavily, any sort of exposure to any sort of toxin or something that your body needs to detoxify, you basically need more nutrients to be able to manage that. And so with children being born into this, this time, they just need more nutrients than they've ever needed before. And unfortunately, our food is less nutrient dense than it ever has been. So it leaves us with a bit of a conundrum. Either you start supplementing, and I totally believe that most children should be on a few supplements, because they're just, we can't give them a perfect diet. Even if you're in the country, even if everything's perfect, I just personally believe that we can't give them enough of everything. So a few supplements here and there depending on the child, but I think we have to eat anyway. Why wouldn't you try and slot in the most nutrient dense foods? And the thing is, children, and even to an extent adults, like there's no way we could eat this much as an adult. We're limited in terms of the amount of calories that we can eat in a particular day, So there's only so much, and getting kids to eat in the first place is a struggle. Like it's a struggle most days for most parents. So to get them to eat large salads, it's just not feasible. Okay, so what we need to do is swap out the processed foods. Most people are aware of that already because there's not a lot of nutrients in those. But even the healthy foods, 5 years ago, I just had no idea that a healthy diet of, meat and 3 veg and lots of superfoods and lots of, I just had no idea that I was barking up the wrong tree with all my packaged superfoods, that actually the most nutrient dense foods are the really unsexy organ meats. So I'm making the case for them. And I guess, that's why they call them a multivitamin. They're not sexy, but they are nature's multivitamins, as are insects, but that's a whole nother call. So what we want to do is basically look at these foods as a nutrient delivery system. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't eat leafy greens. I'm going to talk about the way that I've measured these out in a second. But it's about including these foods and getting your nutrients that way. And then including leafy greens as well, for other reasons, for the phytochemicals, for the fibre, for all the things that these vegetables offer. But organ meats are the best way to get really, and there's a whole range of other foods. I mean, there's other nutrient-dense foods that are on par with organ meats. And basically my program it's designed around teaching you how to source and prepare the most nutrient-dense foods. That's what we cover. There's really nutrient-dense vegetables, fermented foods, different weird products that you've probably never heard of before, different types of seafood that are just a level above the rest. So with these two groups that I've got right here, this just feels really cool. It's kind of like being in a ball pit, something that you always wanted to do. I have done a comparison between kale and liver, and this is measured gram for gram. So this is not just an exaggeration. I actually measured them out. Really, actually got my husband to return 2 bunches of kale because we bought too much. What I've done is I'm comparing B vitamins to B vitamins. Because they both have really good amounts. So in terms of their overall nutrient profile, they both have good amounts of all the B vitamins, or most of the B vitamins. And you can argue there's a lot of controversy around plant versus animal sources of B vitamins. And I think for the sake of this video, we'll just assume that they have the same degree of usefulness in the body, even though that may or may not be true. Don't want to get into that one. But what I've done is I've excluded B2 and B12 to make it fair to kale, because otherwise liver would have just looked, we can't afford that much kale basically. So basically what I've done is calculated the average between I think it's 1, 3, 5, 9, I think that's all, can't remember, all the other B vitamins, right? And this is how it stacks up. This is what you have to eat: 4 bunches of kale or 1 serving, 100 gram serving of liver. So it's pretty, you see where I'm going, right? And when I started running the actual numbers, when I started looking at, I was creating graphs for the Watch Week program, I think it was 6 years ago, just to highlight, the organ meats are good. I had no idea at that point how good they were and what that looks like on a graph, and how shocking it is that we can just eat a bite of this food and basically have the same, it covers all the fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, K2, the water-soluble vitamins, all the B vitamins. You eat 1 serving of liver, you've basically got 50 to 100% of all your B vitamins for the day. And obviously you don't want to be doing this, more than once or twice a week, but it just means that you've got this, safety net that prevents you maybe skipping them 1 week because you just focused on, ordinary meat and vegetables, and you were really stressed and burning through them really quickly. So I have become really passionate about sharing this information since I saw the actual numbers a few years ago. So let's get into the tips for beginners. And just before I do that, I'm trying not to get on tangents. I've got notes in front of me to make sure that I don't do that. But I have to touch on the other reasons we want to eat nose to tail, and there's so many other benefits. Obviously economical. These cuts are usually 1/2 to 1/3 of the price of the prime cuts that you're normally buying. So that's a really good, and obviously more nutrient dense, so extra valuable and very economical. But the reason that I love to highlight to people is the fact that we can actually change the food system if we change our shopping choices just around this one thing. And that's because when we go to the butcher, most butchers, when I first started investigating with butchers, can I get some offal? They're like, yeah, I'll have to order that in for you. And that's a butcher, and this is most butchers these days, are simply ordering in whatever sells. And we don't want the organ meats, we don't use the bones. So they only order in the prime cuts, and that leaves the farmers in a really difficult position because they have to then go off and find somewhere else to sell the rest of the animal to, and usually it's pet food and things like that. So, and that's obviously devastating as a nutritionist to know that the dogs are being better fed than we are, because that's what all the nutrition is. So what we want is for butchers to be able to, sorry, it's a fly here, liver, yeah. We want butchers to be able to order in the whole body and know that they can sell us every part. And that's the way that it used to be. And that shortens the supply chain. It totally overhauls the system because it really makes, farmers, butchers, and you in the picture, not, all the other steps in between, which we won't go into that. So, hang on, I don't know why my notes have just disappeared. Okay, here we go. So, yes, that's what we want to do. And supporting butchers, I guess, butchers who are already doing that. So big shout out to Feather and Bone in Marrickville, Shirley in Brookvale, and Manly, new store in Manly. I don't know why my notes keep disappearing and I need them, otherwise I'm going to start to ramble. And also Ethical Farmers. Hang on. Sorry. I don't know why my computer's... Please don't die on me right now. Okay. It's just, I think... Hang on. 2 seconds, everyone. I really think my computer might be actually dying. So I'm going to continue without notes and you will just have to bear with me with the tangents. Okay, so I think the main thing to realize is that it's worth, when it comes to starting out on this journey, I guess the elephant in the room is squeamishness, okay? And I haven't looked at all the answers for my question before, but I think most people generally, especially out there in the mainstream, squeamishness is the biggest hurdle. And so what I would love you to realize from someone who was literally at the point of dry reaching at the mention of liver and tongue and just, I really, that's where I was 5 years ago. I know that it's possible to overcome it, and I want you to try and keep an open mind and be open to the fact that you can change it really quickly. And it's just a case of, you know, getting the intellectual buy-in with all of these nutrition facts, even doing it for your kids. That's a good motivator. And really then it's just a case of choosing one of the beginner cuts, and I'll go through what they are. And then one by one, it's really just about re-exposure and desensitizing yourself to handling it and eating it. And it works, it happens. The first time I tried tongue, I was mortified at the idea. I had to get my husband to do it. I was over the other side of the room. I was reading the recipe out to him, put it in boiling water, and it was just, I was horrified. The second time, it was a little bit better. Third time, I was fine. Fourth time, it was a complete non-issue. And it's been like that with every single cut. So it's really, just be open to that, that it can happen for you. So what we need to do is, first of all, figure out what the beginner cuts are. And they are, in my opinion, everyone has, you know, different views on this, but I think bone marrow is a really good one to start with, heart meat, brains, liver, and tongue. And it depends what you're struggling with the most, I guess. If you're struggling with handling them, then tongue's obviously going to be quite overwhelming, but tongue tastes exactly just like beef, a really tender beef with fat marbling through it. It's like a Wagyu beef, you know? So it depends if you're funny about the taste and the texture or the handling. And what I'd suggest is that you actually get your butcher on board to help you by mincing through the heart. And you actually might need to get another butcher. If the one that you're dealing with has to order it in and they can't vouch for the quality, and I hope I remember to come back to the quality, you might need to go to a butcher who really carves up whole animals and they know exactly where those organs have come from. So yeah, get them on board, or even get, you know, a really brave husband or friend to help you with actually getting started with the, you know, chopping it up and putting it in the pot so you don't have to deal with that. Get used to the flavor first and then maybe graduate to handling the whole thing. So we'll start with, I think, yeah, I said the beginner cuts. I think marrow is absolutely the easiest to start with, because most people, we don't really think of that as an organ, but it kind of is. And marrow has been traditionally used as basically a nourishing food for children for forever. In all traditional cultures, this is considered an essential food for children because it's amazing for immune boosting. There's several compounds in there. I won't go into all the science, but science is now confirming that the compounds found in it, they're only found in breast milk and one other place, you know, so they're rare compounds that are found that actually boost our immune systems. They're used in cancer treatments. It helps you lose weight. It helps with insulin resistance. There's a whole range of benefits in these foods, which seems counterintuitive because we've been brainwashed to think, oh, they're fat, and it's just concentrated sources of fat and nothing else, and nothing could be further from the truth. And I think these traditional cultures were aware of that. So with those, the way that you talk to your butcher about this, because somebody mentioned in the poll that we had earlier that they don't know what to ask for. So when it comes to marrow, what you want to do, there's two ways to use them, in my opinion. There's roasting it. So if you're going to roast it, you want to sort of have it cut lengthways down the bone so it looks like a boat. and then you roast it in the oven for 20 minutes until it's nice and sort of, you know, brown on the top. Sprinkle a bit of salt on, you can eat it just as is. Or you can actually scrape that into a processor and blend it with herbs. I use anchovies and garlic and all sorts of flavorings, and a little bit of butter, or you can use olive oil or some other spread if you're dairy free. And it basically sets in the fridge, and it becomes a spreadable, nutritious spread, or something that you can put over. You can slice it up and put it on steak. So it's wonderful used like that, and that's a really easy thing to do, to make that up, and it will last a week in the fridge. To spoon that onto vegetables and let it melt over vegetables, so that anyone can do that. And yeah, it's obviously a lot more nutrient dense than plain butter on its own. The other way is to, or you could, seriously just eat it on its own. That's delicious. The other way is to get your butcher to actually cut down the bone, so it's like a transverse cut, and it will form little cylinders. And what you do with those is pop that into a little pot of simmering water, and 10-15 minutes, it should be sort of loose. And then you push them through with a chopstick or something so that they go into a little bowl, and you've basically got a bowl full of plain marrow that hasn't been roasted, so it's got a very neutral flavour. And then what you can do with that is actually make a sweet custard. It sounds a bit bizarre to put bone marrow because we think of it as a savoury food, but it's actually almost pure fat. It does have some proteins in there as well. So you can absolutely put that in a sweet custard and you will not be able to tell the difference. It's actually a beautiful food and a very convenient food for busy mums to make, because putting that into a custard, you just throw it into your, I use a Thermomix, but any sort of blender or processor, eggs, whatever flavourings you want, any sort of sweetener, the marrow, and whatever milk you like. You can use coconut milk or nut milks or dairy, whatever you like. Blend it all up, pour it into a dish and shove it in the oven. And that makes a huge big pour. If you do that in bulk, you can have that in the fridge and have that for dessert every night after dinner if you're into dessert. And it doesn't have to be overly sweet. We keep ours it's just got a hint of sweetness to it, and everybody gets used to the flavour, and it obviously just tastes exactly like a regular custard. You can also make that into a savoury version, and I'm still working on a really good recipe at the moment. I'm still perfecting it, but basically bone broth as a base with lots of salt and herbs and the bone marrow and the eggs, and that is absolutely delicious. And you put, I always put dashi flakes in there because it's come from a sort of Japanese style recipe. So that one's a really easy one to do to start with. The next one, I think heart meat is a really good second step up, I would say. Particularly if you're squeamish about handling something. Heart, you can just go to your butcher and say, I want 50-50 beef heart and beef mince. Heart is actually the richest food source of coenzyme Q10. And when we talk about it being a rich food source, it is miles ahead, along with liver, above everything else. So we're talking maybe 10 times or 3 or 4 or 5, 6 times more nutrient dense when it comes to coenzyme Q10 as other foods. So it's really powerful, and that is a really important antioxidant that we all need. Fat soluble, very, very powerful. You can see my computer has just come back to life, but I'm not going to bother with the notes anymore. I'm on a roll. So heart is a really easy one to implement, and it's also much higher in protein. So if people are wanting to have a high protein diet, it's got less fat and more muscle, because it is a very, very strong muscle in the body. So really wonderful, and much higher in other nutrients as well, but I won't go into the full nutritional panel. All you have to do is go to your butcher, get the mince. Always start with 50-50. We now have 100% heart mince in our bolognese. The thing with kids is you just make their favourite foods. You make bolognese, you make burgers, you make nuggets, you make all the things that they would normally love to eat, and you just sneak in, you know, a bit of organ meat into it. But heart is it doesn't taste like anything other than beef. If you're doing beef hearts, it just tastes a little bit, I have to use this pun, but there's no other word for it. It just tastes a little bit heartier. So I call it my hearty bolognese recipe, which I'll share with you below. Heart is yummy roasted too. Oh yes, there's so many different ways you can cook this. I think for beginners, mince is the ideal, but that you can slow roast them. There's so many things you can do. And with kids, if they're not squeamish with the idea of it, if you've got boys who are a bit courageous, or girls who are like not grossed out by that sort of thing, you can get them to thread little chicken hearts onto a skewer and fry that both sides just really quickly. You don't want to make it too tough. It's the only thing with heart is that it can be quite tough if it's not cooked correctly. Mince, you cook it the same exact way. But little hearts from chickens taste exactly like just purine rich heart meat. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference in flavour if you had your eyes closed. So that's a really, really easy one to get started with. I also love lamb hearts, but I won't just start with those two. And then the next organ meat is, I'm just trying to make sure I've covered everything. I don't know if I mentioned marrow, really, really important with marrow, not so much with the other cuts, but marrow, absolutely critical that it comes from organic animals. I'm just going to turn the brightness down so I'm not looking. My computer's doing really weird things in the background and distracting me, and that's, yeah, I'm distractible anyway. So yeah, really important to have marrow from organic. You need to go to a good butcher or a good farmer and know that they're doing the right thing on that level, because if farmers aren't organic or they're not using organic methods and they just haven't certified, if they're with a conventional mindset, they use glyphosate on everything, most of them. You know, if you look behind the curtain where, you know, where food production is concerned, there's Roundup all over their pastures, and so this gets into the animals, and they store all sorts of pesticides and chemicals, not just Roundup, but all of the other drugs that have been used, medications that have been used in their lifetime inside the bone marrow and in the other fats. So it's really important with that one that you don't ever use conventional bone marrow, in my opinion. So when it comes back to heart and liver, to a lesser extent, I don't think it's, if all you can access is conventional, it really is just another type of meat, you know. So I don't think, if you're eating regular meat anyway, this is just a more nutrient dense. I know other people disagree with this, but I personally think if you're going to eat conventional muscle meat, because that's all you have access to, or it might be all that you can afford, but if you shop directly with the farmer, it's neck and neck in terms of the pricing. Yeah, that it basically, you're eating a more nutrient dense version, so why wouldn't you? And I even think the same goes for liver. I know that other people would argue that. I don't believe that the liver is a place for, we don't store a lot of toxins in the liver. We store it in the bones, we store it in the fat, we store it, but usually the liver is so nutrient dense that I think the nutrients outweigh any potential for toxins to be present there. It's not a filter, so it doesn't filter toxins, it just neutralizes them. So it's full of all those nutrients that are used to neutralize. So I personally believe that if that's all you can access, a little bit of conventional liver is actually going to do more good than harm. So what was the third one? What was I up to? Heart, brains? Can we go to brains? Obviously, if you're really squeamish about the look of things, brains are not very pretty. So, you know, maybe just get somebody else to do this first step for you. I think it's great to use them in egg dishes. So to blend them up with eggs, so one brain for 5 or 6 eggs in the beginning, maybe 8 eggs if you're really, you know, you really just don't want to taste it at all. They've got a very mild flavor though, very, very high in fat. And when it comes to the type of fat, they have a 10-to-1 ratio. No, 20-to-1 ratio. Sorry, I'm mixing it up with fish roe. 20-to-1 ratio of omega-3 compared to omega-6. We know omega-3 is anti-inflammatory, and omega-6 can be pro-inflammatory if we have too much of it, and we do have too much of it in this day and age. So traditional cultures had about 1-to-1 up to 1-to-4. Recipe book of secondary cuts. Yes, well, I know I'm still writing my recipe book, but I do have recipes on the blog, Teresa. And I am definitely going to write a book and do a little e-course at some point on this, because I love talking about it. We basically have a omega-3 to 6 ratio of 1 to up to 20, 30. Some people say up to 50 if people are on a purely processed diet. So one thing that's really important is that we balance that ratio. And one way to do that is, yes, start supplementing with fish oil if you want to. But I think what's more important is to eat foods that help balance that ratio. Cut out all the high omega-6 foods, mainly all the vegetable oils. But even if you overeat lots of nuts and seeds, they are 100% omega-6, most of them. So if you're having nut flour, nut milk, nut cake, nut everything, you're definitely going to be pushing yourselves too high in that regard, and you absolutely must supplement with omega-3. So, but I think what I like to do is eat foods that have a really wonderful ratio, and good quality meats that have been grass-fed will have a brilliant ratio, but brains have a 20-to-1 ratio. So that's a really good thing. So got off on a bit of a tangent, that's why notes would have been preferable. So with brains, you can either eat them in your egg dishes, so making them into, once you've blended them with a blender, all in together, a bit of milk, any variety, eggs, salt, seasoning, and preach sister, and brains, blend it up. You wouldn't even know that it's in there
taste or appearance. You can make scrambled eggs, you can make frittata, you can make omelette, and just put lots of other, tomatoes and feta and what else you want to put in there. I've got a good recipe which I'll post below. But the other way that I've been doing in the last year or so, and I just haven't got around to writing a recipe, is to dice it up, pretend it's tofu, dice it up into little cubes, and put it into like a minestrone or even like an Asian soup, and pretend it's tofu, and it takes on the flavor of the soup, and it's beautiful, and it feels and tastes, and you could fool someone and tell them that it was tofu, they wouldn't be any the wiser. So I think that's a really good way to do it as well. And the other thing is brains, because they're so high in fat and neutral tasting, and you can just blend them into anything. So burgers, any sort of other, into mince, whatever you can make with mince, you can grind the brains in there. Is that all I wanted to say on brains? I think 40% of your daily requirement of vitamin C, even after cooking. I thought that was, when I first started learning about organ meats, I was really blown away by the fact that meats could contain vitamin C. I thought it only came from fruits and vegetables. And that's how people like the Inuit, people who really survive mainly on meat, that's where they get their vitamin C from. So I thought that was really cool. What else? What's the other one? Remind me. Liver. We'll go to liver, okay? And I know that's the one that most people struggle with the most in terms of flavor and texture. But there's a couple of ways that I just absolutely love to prepare it. And I even still, I have my limits with liver. When I first started eating these foods, I really do think the body has it regulates, right? Like when you start to consume these foods, I would crave liver, and I probably overdosed. And these days I just don't. I still have a love-hate relationship. I love the flavor of it, but it's a rich food. But there are certain ways that I could cook it, and it would almost override my regulation, my body's regulation, because it's so delicious. So my first caution is, when you're dealing with beef liver, is that most people who are struggling with gut issues, which is most of us, you want to be careful with beef liver. And that's the only issue with the beautiful supplements on the market with the capsules, that it's all beef liver. And so beef liver has just a really imbalanced proportion of zinc and copper, and most people have that sort of out of whack anyway. And it's not that we should avoid eating copper at all if you have copper toxicity, but it's about keeping that ratio in balance. And so I think it's something like 5 times the amount of copper in terms of your daily requirement, or 10 times than there is zinc, and that is not a good thing for most people. So I really encourage people to have the lamb, the chicken, the duck, and especially for children, I don't think they should be on beef liver. I'm really, I have strong opinions about the fact that they should be on lamb and chicken and goose and turkey and whatever exotic poultry that you can get your hands on. So that's important. And also, as you go down the animals, they get a little bit less nutrient dense, but they also get a lot more palatable. The only one that sort of bucks that trend is lamb liver, which is obviously a much larger animal than any of the birds. But lamb liver is the most mild I have found over and over again. It's a beautiful liver. It's become to be my favorite. And the way that I prepare it is to really, really thinly slice it. If you've got a good butcher, they'll do it for you. But you can buy a whole lamb liver. And even if you have no kitchen skills whatsoever, all you need is a very sharp, large, chef's knife. You just put your hand on the top, and you press down firmly, and you just cut really slowly underneath there. I promise you need no skills. The only thing you'll do is you'll cut too thin, and then it will be paper thin, and that's a good thing. So I guarantee it might not be totally even, but it's very easy to chop it very thinly. And when you've got it like that, you can either, with any liver, you can soak it for up to 12 hours in orange juice, lemon juice, any sort of citrus juice, or kefir or milk, any sort of lactose base, like it's the enzymes and the sugars that kind of help neutralize the flavor and also make it a lot more tender as well. And so they'll make it it goes off the charts, but I don't even bother with that because I like the taste of lamb liver now. But if you're doing it for the first time, that would be a good idea. And you take that finely sliced paper thin lamb liver. My mouth's actually watering. That's when you know you're a convert, just talking about it. So yeah, you take that and you basically put it into a gluten-free flour if you're gluten-free, or regular flour. We put it in a little bit of teff or buckwheat flour, just a light coating. Put it into some beaten egg yolks with lots of salt in there, and then we press it into toasted sourdough breadcrumbs with that have been blended with parsley and Parmesan cheese, and lots of salt, and it is absolutely amazing. You fry it really, really quickly, like just, maybe even less than a minute on each side. You want the liver to be, anytime you overcook liver, it gets really tough. And likewise, if you leave it for 6 hours and then you eat it, it needs to be eaten straight away. So that's another really good tip. And it is just the most amazing. You would never guess that it's liver because the flavor of all of the crumbs overtake it, and it's a mild liver anyway. So I think I've got a recipe for that. If anyone wants to see a video of that, actually, I have that as a video. If you go to the What to Eat program page and go in there, if you sign up for the free chapter, that's the video that you get with that. So what's next after liver? I didn't mention all the nutrients in liver, but believe me, that it's the most nutrient-dense food on the planet and worth persisting with. Pate, that's what I wanted to briefly mention. Pate is a really easy thing. Even if you don't like traditional pates, it's easy to make that in a really mild way for children or beginners. So I have a recipe which I'll post for pear and sage. Whenever you just take any sort of pate recipe and add sauteed fruit into it. So sauteed pear, sauteed apple, even Sula from Star Anise Organic uses dried fruit. Just any sort of fruit to make it sweet. And mushrooms also help to, basically, they're like a diluter. If you saute some mushrooms and have those in, and just less liver to mushrooms, and gradually work up your way to having 100% liver and no mushrooms, it's a really good way to get started and to get kids on board with a mild, flavor. Having said that, most children adore the flavor of liver if we haven't programmed them with our stuff. I've certainly found that with my son. If we put steak and liver in front of him, there's no question he'll always choose the liver, although it might be because I ate a lot during pregnancy. We'll see. So that's another really easy way to get liver in. And duck, chicken, turkey and goose, all wonderful, wonderful, wonderful ones to choose for children as well, because they have very high levels of vitamin K2. Goose has the highest, and all our children are deficient in K2. So that's a whole other, if you want to tune in, Alex Stewart, I recorded a podcast with Alex Stewart. You can have a look for that, where I wax lyrical about vitamin K2 for a good 40 minutes or so, if you want to know why that's so important, and other really good sources of that nutrient. Last one is tongue, and tongue is, yes, very overwhelming if you're handling it yourself for the first time, but is hands down the most palatable organ meat that there is. It's just, it's just the nicest. It's my favorite food, bar none. Okay, because it's got fat marbled through it. It's beautiful. It's very easy to prepare. It's no longer as cheap as it used to be. I've noticed all the butchers, everyone's putting their prices up because it's in such high demand, because I know that the chefs all like to use it in their restaurants now. So it's one of those ones, if you can get your hand on one. Veal is a little bit more tender, needs to be cooked for slightly less time. And what you do is you get the tongue. It looks just like a tongue, and you plop it into a big pot of boiling water. You can do mirepoix, you can do onions, carrots, celery and herbs and spices if you want to, but you don't need to. I always put a nice big hefty pinch of salt in there and boil it for 2 hours, or like sort of fast simmer, and then peel it, and the skin will come off really easily while it's warm, just like eggshells. Don't let them cool down because it's harder to peel then. Peel all the skin off, slice it up, and you can eat just like that with salt, or pan fry it, and it's exactly like small pieces of steak. Your family would never know that you're serving them tongue. It's super tender. They'll go, "Whoa, Mum, what have you done?" or "Dad, what have you done?" Because it's beautiful and just tastes exactly like beef. So that's the first way. The second way is to cook it for 5 hours or longer, and then if it's beef, I would do maybe 6 hours, and then peel it. You'll actually have trouble peeling it because it just pulls apart. It's like a pulled shredded meat, and it's the most amazing meat. It has to be warm because it's fairly high in fat, so when it sets, it looks a bit fatty, but we're okay with fat if it's from a good healthy animal. But beautiful in things like tacos, soft tacos and things like that, or chopped up for sandwiches. It's absolutely beautiful. So that's a really easy one. Once you get over the fact that you need to put a tongue into the pot and then peel it, that's a really one to include. So I encourage you to get outside of your comfort zone and do that one if you can get your head around it. I'm just trying to think what else. I think I said I was going to talk about hiding it and also how to get kids on board. Obviously, whenever you hide it, obviously all the ways I've talked about are fairly inconspicuous once they're done. I'm giving you beginner options with everything that I've said so far. But if it's really too much, even for you to look at something and know what it is, what you can do is it's either powdering it or just blending it and freezing it. So the way that you do that is if you've got liver, for example, and this is the main one that you're probably dealing with as a supplement, because you want to include it, but it might be too strong. So what you do is you slice the liver up. It can be thicker slices, dehydrate it, and this is fresh. Dehydrate it fairly quickly if you can, and then powder it, make it into a powder. You want to make sure if you're doing it this particular way that it is coming from a good source, nice healthy animal, because the animals that have been grown the conventional way, they're more likely to have issues with them. So whenever we're dealing with anything raw, there's more chance that something could go wrong. There's very little chance if you're using a pastured grass-finished and fed and finished animal and organic that anything would go wrong with this, as long as you do it in a really hygienic way. So you blend that completely dry product into a powder, and then you can keep that in the fridge or freezer and just sprinkle that into your cooking. Super easy, everyone can do that. You can, if you were really had trouble taking it, you could put it into your own capsules if you could be bothered to do that. And so obviously they only make beef liver capsules. You could get lamb liver or chicken liver or any of the other types that you wanted to include. The other way is to simply, if you can't be bothered to do the whole dehydration thing, is to pop the liver into a blender, make it into a really disgusting smoothie, just blending it on its own, and then pour it into ice cube trays. And then you can just plop all of those, or one of those little cubes into your cooking, into your soups, stews, casseroles, bolognese, and that's a really easy way to get it in there. For adults, not for children, but for adults, if you want to take it, you can't be bothered with any of that, another really easy way to do it, only with organic and grass-finished liver, is to chop it into tiny, tiny, tiny little pills, lay it out on a tray, put it in the freezer, and then you can take it like a capsule every day. And I did that through my pregnancy when I was having real aversions in the first trimester. That was a really good way to just get it in without having to think about it. It just goes down cold. There's no flavour. Whenever you freeze things, that you reduce the flavour. It's the same with liver. You can't even taste it. There's no aftertaste whatsoever. It's a really easy way to do it. In terms of getting your kids on board, I think the best way, if you've got kids the right age, brands of dehydrators, I've only ever used an Excalibur dehydrator. I know there's the Sedona, which is the more flashy version, but they're all the same. Once you get them, I don't think you need a flashy one. Try and look for a second-hand Excalibur on Gumtree or one of the other sites, so buy, swap, sell, because, unless they're broken, new or old, doesn't matter at all. Don't bother getting a brand new one, in my opinion. So yeah, getting kids on board. If they're the right age, young, you just start feeding it to them and diluting it initially and then building up the flavour, and they'll be on board. They're not squeamish like that. They'll eat, they eat really disgusting things. They eat all sorts of things and you're not looking. So they're fine. The middle-aged kids, I think the best way to handle it is to treat it like you would a fine champagne. Well, actually, even a crappy champagne, you would not give it to your children. So be a little bit like, oh no, this is mummy's special food. This is mummy, and use reverse psychology. Say, okay, you can have one little sip, one tiny bit of the liver, there you go. Do you like it? It's yummy, isn't it? And just bit by bit, allow them to have a little bit more, treat it like they're very, like it's a really big deal, and it works. It works across the board with everyone who's ever tried it. You've just got to be very convincing. It all comes down to your acting skills and how engaging you are with your children and how much they believe you, because they can spot a fake a mile away. So it's got to be good. I think that's all. I'm talking really quickly. I don't know if I've covered absolutely everything that I initially wanted to cover. So thank you for being on the call. I will continue to stay around and answer as many questions as you want to throw at me. Just keep them coming. It's my favourite topic to talk about, and I will, happy to sort of sit here for 3 days and answer questions if they keep coming. Just wanted to mention again the fact that my program starts on the 6th of March, but the Facebook Lives that are coming up are really, really worth seeing. So if you missed the beginning of the call, we have Wednesday interviews. This Wednesday coming is Jane Jenkinson from Wholefood Family. So bring all your fermentation questions to her. She's a guru and she's amazing and she's lovely to listen to. And then the following Saturday it will be me again. Same with the following Saturday. And then we're interviewing Shalani McRae the Wednesday after this one coming. So hope to see you in the program. If you're interested in this sort of topic, you'll love it. Otherwise, feel free to ask as many questions as you want to, and I'll be here for you. Okay, bye.